Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kathy McCaws, the Marketing Director of GeoNexus Technologies, and we want to thank you today for joining us for today's webcast, The Power of Asset Visualization with IBM Maximo Spatial and GeoNexus Solutions. During this 40-minute session, we'll take a look at leveraging geospatial capabilities and improving asset management through the integration of Maximo and GIS. Before we begin, let's take a quick overview of GeoNexus Technologies. We're a software solutions company that specializes solely in GIS and EAM integration with customers throughout the U.S. and Canada. Our team brings over 25 years of expertise in GIS and EAM integration systems. Like you, we partner with leading industry solution providers such as Esri and IBM. Rather than implement full enterprise or EAM systems, we focus on providing products and services at the intersection of these two technologies, partnering with system integrators who are responsible for the overall EAM and GIS implementations. GeoNexus Technologies' GeoWorks product suite is the middleware that bridges these two enterprise systems. As you can see here, we offer a complete solution, both services, implementation services, as well as products. On the GeoWorks software side, we also, as you'll hear more about, offer Maximo Spatial integration design services, as well as enhancement development. We are a completely partner-focused company. We work with a number of system integrators, and I know many of you are on the line with us today. At this time, I'd like to introduce GeoNexus's Product Development Manager and Maximo Spatial expert, Jeremy Wolf. Jeremy has over 15 years experience in application development and software engineering. He's involved in all phases of software development lifecycle, from requirements gathering through end-use training. Jeremy has completed over a dozen Maximo Spatial implementations for organizations across North America and is considered an expert in the integration of Esri, Arcgis, and IBM Maximo. At this time, I would like to introduce Jeremy.
I'm just getting back to the slides on my end here.
Okay, thank you.
So hopefully everybody can see it. Kathy, just as a check, can you see?
I can, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. We're going to go through a few more slides just to explain what GeoWorks Sync is and what it does, and then we're going to get into a demonstration of the technology. So, as you can see on here, it's data synchronization between the Maximo database and an Esri geodatabase, being SDE, Esri geodatabase. And we're showing database to database, but in reality, it actually does only go through the APIs by those vendors' software. So on the Maximo side, it's a Maximo Business Objects. On the GIS side, it's Arcgis. And the integration is on the asset, location, service address side on Maximo, and you can map attributes in Maximo or specification attributes in Maximo to fields in your geodatabase. And Sync will also take care of the location hierarchy if so desired. So relationships in GIS can translate to relationships in Maximo between assets and locations. You see on the geodatabase side, we integrate with features or tables. So a lot of times we'll show the electric transmission distribution demo today. You've got related tables of data that also need to be represented as, say, assets or locations in Maximo. And then the fields within those features and tables. Sync will also detect feature splits, which causes duplication of identifiers that link to Maximo in the geodatabase. It'll also deal with record deletion, so updating, as an example, updating the status of an asset or location in Maximo when that feature gets deleted or record gets deleted from the geodatabase. And this just shows a little bit of a diagram of the different components to the overall solution. So the integration is database to database. Maximo is fully functional when this is done. So by what we mean by that is if GIS were to go down, become unavailable, all the data that resides within Maximo is enough to get your job done. So there's not truly an outage. Obviously, if GIS went down completely, you might lose your map on the map tab inside of Maximo for Maximo Spatial, but the data would still be there to make decisions and see what the current attributes are of individual components, entities, assets, and locations. So it's an easy to install and configure tool. This is GeoWorks Sync we're talking about. It's proven, multiple implementations, multiple installations. Just want to note that it is complementary to Maximo Spatial. So Maximo Spatial provides the map view within Maximo, and that provides a lot of power to our users. The GeoWorks Sync application provides the data integration. So allowing the data to be edited in both places, allow your workflows to continue as they were, integration of GIS and Maximo, and moving the data at the data level in between the two, making it available to both systems natively. And we've got a roadmap. If anybody, I'm not sure if Kathy's going to send a link to that, but it is available on request. So we've got a roadmap of features to come. We'll show you obviously what we've got built to date. And just to kind of highlight a couple of these pieces is the place where GeoWorks Sync resides is typically on a server. It can be on a desktop machine. It's just an installed application that talks to both Esri's GeoDatabase and IBM's Maximo application server. So it doesn't have to reside on either one of the actual servers or an application server. It's up to your choosing where that resides. And now what we'll do is we'll get into a demonstration. And we're first going to do a little bit of an overview. I'm assuming a lot of people on today have seen Maximo. They might have even seen Maximo Spatial. But just to make sure that everybody's got a chance to see the components that we're talking about, we'll actually log into Maximo. And we're going to start on the Start Center. We're not going to go through Maximo in heavy detail, but we're going to focus on assets today. So we're going to go to the Assets application.
Jeremy, we have a question that just came through.
Sure.
Well, first of all, we'd like to engage our audience with a quick poll. And we're curious if anyone out there is currently integrating their GIS and Maximo. So we'll go ahead and take a moment and let the audience do that. But Jeremy, I just received a message from one of our attendees. It says, can GeoWorks Sync connect to a specified edit version, or does it have to connect to a specific one?
As you'll see when we go through the demonstration, it can actually connect to whatever version you configure it to connect to, and that could be different for different feature classes, as an example, if that makes sense for your workflow. A lot of times our clients will have it connect to like a QA/QC version that resides above the SD default version, but it's whatever version that you choose. Great question.
Thank you. And we are now looking at our poll results. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so hopefully everyone can see Maximo. And we're, again, on the assets, in the assets application, got there from the Start Center. What we want to do is go through the location drill down just to kind of highlight the integration with the Maximo location hierarchy. So this is an electric transmission distribution company. We're focusing on the distribution side today. You can see that at the top level we've got a company, then we've got the distribution network essentially, and then different regions of responsibility, central, north, and south. We're going to look at south today, Within there we've got distribution poles, and then we've got transformers, and within those pad mounted transformers. First off, we want to go look at some of the poles. So I'll select that spot in the hierarchy. We'll go out to one of the assets and just kind of take a look at what that asset looks like. So we've got an asset, just kind of a standard asset. Maximo, we can see that it's in a location. The description is built by the specifications. We can see specifications, these being shared with GIS. And then we'll just go out to the map. And this is Maximo Spatial. We can see where on the map that specific asset resides. So now what we want to do is just go to continue our overview, go show Arcmap. So if you're an editor and you use a GIS editor, you use Arcmap, you'd be familiar with this. And we can see that exact same pole right here. Maps look similar. And we can see I'm editing in a version that's not SD default, very typical. And we'll get to this later on when we go through some of the actual scenarios. We'll use Arcmap. To continue the overview, just want to show what GeoWorks Sync looks like. Again, it's an installed application that can be launched from your program list. So we can see, we launch it from here. It's got 3 tabs. The console, today I do want to highlight, today we're going to be invoking on demand just to make the demo a little bit more interactive. Typically this would be scheduled, not the GUI, but the background process would be scheduled to run once a day, maybe once a week, maybe on intervals throughout the day. But you can also come into the user interface and start synchronizer on demand, which we'll be doing today to show those scenarios. And while it's running, we'll actually see a report of what's going on inside the system. The configuration, and we'll go through this a little bit later, but this is where you actually configure your connections to the different systems, and then your individual data sets that you want to synchronize. And then a reports tab that shows all the reports that are generated. So every time sync runs with success, with some errors, it will generate a report that gives you all the details of what happened for each run. So now, I'd like to pause. That's kind of the overview of the different components that we're going to be looking at today. I'd just like to pause, see if there are any additional questions out there before we move into updates being synchronized. And
go ahead, Jeremy.
Right now.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Sure. I'll continue on. So I'm going to flip back over here to Maximo. We'll actually pick on this poll again since we're already there. And the scenario here is someone noticed while they're out in the field that this specific asset, and they were working on this asset, installing a guy wire. They noticed that there was no installation date, and there should be an installation date on all of the poles. They also noticed that the pole height was inaccurately recorded as 35 feet. It should be 40 feet. Those are things that GIS manages, both the installation date and the pole height in this specific scenario. So GIS needs to be notified to get those updated. In this situation, though, I, in Maximo, can actually update the number of guy wires. Since the guy wire was installed, we want to update that value. So that way GIS will receive that once we synchronize. Then we'll go back into Arcmap. I'm going to start editing, as I typically do as an editor. I want to pick this pole. I'm going to look at the attributes. And I just want to note that, again, the number of guy wires is 0 here, just like it was in Maximo. Still 0 because we haven't synchronized the updates. The installation date, went back to the original as-built drawings, found that the installation date was there. We can add it. We can also update the height to 40 feet. And that completes the edits I needed to make for this request. So as I typically would do as an editor, I'm going to reconcile and post my changes so they're visible to everybody. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to stop editing. And then we'll run sync. And again, this is something that typically Wouldn't happen immediately. You could push the button, synchronize it right away if that was necessary, but typically it would happen during non-business hours. So most often nightly. What it's going to do here is it's going to load the configuration as we've specified. It's going to validate that, make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. Then it's going to go through the different data sets and synchronize, try to detect changes, detect if there's anything new to add, so on and so forth. And the yellow things that we see are things that need to happen, things of interest. If we had any errors, we'd see red on here. But the yellow, as noted, is we can see assets were updated. One asset was updated, and edit was updated. That's exactly what we'd expect because we made an edit in both sides. So edits got pushed both ways. Now what we want to do is go back over here. I'm just going to refresh. I'm going to go back up to the list. And we can see, again, the description says, it's a 35-foot pole. One of the things we did in GIS was we said that it needed to be a 40-foot pole. We made that change. So I'm just going to refresh this one. You'll see the description has changed to include that specification update of 40 feet. Another thing that we changed in GIS that should propagate over is the installation date. So now we see it was empty. Now it's populated with what we entered into GIS. If we go on the specifications, we'll notice that the number of guy wires, still 1. The height is 40 feet. And just flipping back over to Arcmap, we'll see that that guy wire update of 1 came in. And I wouldn't have to start editing to see this, but it's a little bit easier to show if I go in here and I select it, show the attributes, and then scroll back down here, and we can see number of guy wires is 1. So that's just basic day-to-day editing. We've shown you that responsibility can be assigned to one system. Guy wires in this case is actually bidirectional. You can edit it in both GIS and Maximo, but we've noticed, or we noted that height and installation date in this scenario are owned by GIS. So that's the data update scenario. The next scenario that we'll show is actually adding a whole new subdivision. But before we do that, I want to pause and see if there are any additional questions.
Yes, Jeremy, we actually have 3 questions. The first one is, does GeoWorks have its own database?
GeoWorks does have a data store, and it's a file I shouldn't say file geodatabase. It's a file data store. It's actually a Derby database, which is the standard database that comes with Java. It's a Java application. It's a natural decision. That data store is used for comparison. So it's not a database that's used to try to store all of the data forever. It's there for comparison to bring the data in and compare side by side, since the data structures are very different in GIS and Maximo. Okay. So yes, it does. Good question.
The next question we have from our audience is do attributes have to be owned by a single system, or can they be modified by both?
So that's a great question. The attributes could actually be, you can assign ownership based on the sync rules, and we'll go through some of those a little bit later, but you can assign ownership, one owner. So this attribute we want GIS. Very often there are things tied to your geometric network in GIS that you don't want Maximo to change. You want your GIS editors to change those. You would assign ownership just to GIS. There are other things that might make sense for Maximo to own, so you assign ownership to Maximo, so that would only propagate from Maximo to GIS. There are other things, typically like location description is something that's shared between the two systems, so you could edit it. Your GIS editors could edit it, or Maximo could edit it. But yes, it's on a field and attribute by attribute configuration.
The next question we have is, what are the updates from both? What if there are updates from both sides in the same sync?
So if there are updates from both sides, well, you saw there were updates from both sides, right? We moved a change in Maximo to GIS. We moved two changes in GIS to Maximo. So they can flow in different directions. If we're talking about an individual field, so guy wires as an example, if I had for some reason changed it to a 2 in GIS and I had changed it to a 1 over in Maximo, we've got a conflict. Because it's bidirectionally mapped, what would happen is an error would be reported, and you'd be notified of that error. And it would say that it was 0 in Maximo before, it changed to a 1. It was 0 in GIS before, it changed to a 2. And it would require manual intervention to decide what the value really is supposed to be. And typically then you would go in and you would change it in the system that needs to be updated. If 1 or 2 was correct, you would change it in the other system. If, in fact, it was actually supposed to be 3, you could change it, and then that would flow the right direction. Another great question.
Well, thank you. Let's look at adding a subdivision.
Sure. So the next thing I want to do is just go back into the map just to show that we're missing this subdivision. And we're not really missing it. It's just a new subdivision that's going to be brought online. We've had an editor working all day to digitize this subdivision. And just want to show on the map where that subdivision will come in. So we've got, you can see the parcels, you can see the street, but we don't have any electrical service to this subdivision. So we'll go back over here into Arcmap, and we can see, if we move over here a little bit, I can't see the subdivision in this version either. So what we want to do is we actually want to switch to the editor version where the editor was making the changes. And when we switch, then you'll see the new subdivision show up. And as part of the subdivision, you can see service points, you can see pad mounted transformers, you can see the power distribution network here. But you can also, or you can't see this, but I also wanted to note that the pole was replaced as part of this subdivision add. So we'll actually see in Maximo what happens when one pole was removed and a new pole, brand new pole got added. So what we want to do is go in, start editing in this version. We're going to reconcile and post those changes up so that way we can actually, everybody else can see those. This long transaction is now complete. Editor's making it visible to everybody else. Once we're done with that, we'll stop editing. We'll switch back to the version we're at, just so we can see that it's now available to everybody. Switch to sync, we still see it. So now we want to synchronize again. And what we should see here is we should see all those pad mounted transformers get added. We should actually see the delete of the old pole that we replaced get handled. We should also see the new pole that got inserted get handled as well. So we're expecting one new pole to get added to Maximo, an existing pole that got deleted from GIS, get its status updated, and then I believe there are 5 pad mounted transformers that should get added into Maximo. So you can see here it's adding, for that new pole that got added, it's adding a new record. So I've created the asset and then updated the asset from that deleted one. And then down here, in pad mounted transformers, exactly as we expect, 5 new ones. And as soon as that's complete, we'll flip back over here to Maximo. And I'm just going to move the map a little bit. This being a web technology, it's not going to refresh the map unless I do something. So I just want to move the map so it refreshes, redraws, and we should see that whole subdivision. Now it's visible on our map within Maximo. And using our selection tools, I should be able to go in here and select all these assets. And if I click on one of those, the green push pin, this is a Maximo Spatial thing. If there's a gray push pin, it tells me that, yeah, you've selected it, but it's not linked to Maximo. If it's a green push pin for points, it's telling me that it is linked. And I can see that also by looking at the asset identifier here. And then down here, we've got the poles. What I want to do is, from that selection, I want to update my list. And I should see 7 things. So not 6 things. It's the 5 transformers, and then it's also the 2 poles. It's the one that got removed from GIS, and it's the one that we just added. So before I go down to the poles, I just want to show, this got added into the right location, as we'd expect. So it's the pad mounted transformers that is under the transformer location for the south distribution area. And we can see that the description got built from the specifications. If we go over here, look at the specifications. There are a lot of specifications. They're not all filled in, but we can see as we scroll through, different ones have different values filled in. And on this specific one, if we go up and we look at the map, it'll center at that specific transformer. It's this one here. But back to our list, so we've got these 5 new transformers added. I'm going to show the difference between these 2 poles, really, besides the asset identifier. Most things probably being the same. The difference is the status. This is our brand new one that just got added. If we cycle to that next one in the list, we can see that its status is pending decommission. Now, this isn't an out-of-the-box status, but it's a synonym got added to the local asset status domain. It's a synonym of operating. So that just indicates that ultimately this thing needs to be decommissioned because it's been removed. And eventually somebody will be able to do that. Sync doesn't, we don't recommend that you configure Sync to try to decommission it because often, not that you can't, but often it'll encounter an error because there might be an open work order on that. Especially in this case where we're replacing a pole, there's probably a work order on that original pole that needs to be closed before that asset can be decommissioned. So that is the addition of a subdivision. The last scenario that we'll go through, it's not really a scenario, we'll just go through some of the configuration and reporting. Before I do that, I'll open it up for questions again.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, we have several questions, and we've got 10 minutes left in this presentation. One of our audience members is asking, what is the relationship between Maximo Spatial and GeoNexus, and is Maximo Spatial required?
So that's a great question. Our relationship with Maximo Spatial, I say our, GeoNexus relationship with Maximo Spatial, is that we do help companies and partners of ours that are Maximo implementers implement Maximo Spatial. So if they've got an existing Maximo and they now want GIS and want to add Maximo Spatial, we can help with that. If it's a brand new implementation of Maximo, we can help with it then too. And it isn't required. It obviously makes the whole experience for the users a whole lot better if Maximo Spatial is there because it provides the map of the assets and locations and so on that you're seeing inside of Maximo. But GeoWorks Sync can function without Maximo Spatial. Great question.
We have another question here about what about removing serialized assets? And it says obviously you won't want to delete everything. How does Sync work with rebuilds, retires, moving to other locations?
So if you're moving it to a location, there are two things you can do. You can obviously move it to a different location in Maximo, and that's something we handle. It's an asset change-out, right? A lot of times you might have something that needs to be rebuilt, it needs to be brought back to the shop, but we have to install a new one in that location. Obviously, from a mapping perspective, we want it to be in the same spot. So that's an asset change-out, and in that case, the asset number would flow back over to Maximo, or to GIS, the asset number change, essentially, and depending upon how you've configured it, we would hope that you've configured during that situation that all of the attributes would also flow to GIS. Telling GIS, you know, that shape that you had here before with this asset number, now it's this asset. The other thing you could do is you could actually do it from the GIS side. So you're changing the parent location, essentially, of that asset. Maybe not as common, but we've seen that occur as well. And then you'd actually see the move history change of that asset inside of Maximo. So you'd see the old one get moved out and the new one get moved in to a specific location. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, hopefully we can get another question to nail me down on the answer.
Okay, another question. Just to verify, Sync can use a different version per feature class.
That is correct. Yeah, it's you can share them between feature classes, but you can. It's a different Maximo connection, or I mean GIS connection at that point. So you configure multiple connections to geodatabases or a geodatabase in Sync, and then you use those connections to decide, you know, which feature classes that you're synchronizing. So yes, you could, in theory, have a different version for every feature class.
Okay, well, this last question right now might lead into your next session. Is there exception reporting where a record exists in one but not the other?
Yeah, and I'll try to show that. So we would typically would call that the different scenarios. Typically we'd call it an orphan if the system wasn't set up to automatically create the missing record in the system that doesn't have it. So the orphan report would tell you where you've got records in one system and not in the other. Because you can configure Sync to create records in Maximo from GIS, you might not actually see it as an orphan because at the end of synchronization, it would create that new asset, location, service address, whatever it is inside of Maximo. But if you don't turn the auto creation on, then it would just show you the orphan report. So yes, it can, but there are different ways it can handle those situations. Thanks, another good question. So is that it, Kathy? Should I?
Yeah, go ahead and proceed, Jeremy. Thank you.
All right, we'll try to stay as true to that stop time in the next 8 minutes as possible. I could go through a lot of configuration, but we'll try to highlight it. So you've seen the console. We're just going to go in here to the configuration and just to kind of go back over a couple of those questions we had. So here we've got GIS connections, and you can, in your GIS connections, you can define multiple connections, and you give them a unique name within the configuration that's used later when you configure your data sources to refer back to whatever connection it's using. And then Maximo connections. This connects right to the MX, a running application server, the MX server. And typically you're only going to have one Maximo connection, but you could presumably have multiples. And then under here, just kind of go through the pool configuration. Transformers is very similar. So you've got different data sources, and we've got the ability in GeoWorks Sync to publish features out to a publish geodatabase. So you'll see two data sources in here, one for edit, one for publish. Edit is your enterprise geodatabase that's synchronized with Maximo. Publish is there typically to support your map viewer, and that might be Maximo Spatial. And the main reason that we've supported this is because there are scenarios where you might have a different version in your enterprise GIS than Maximo Spatial could support. So this allows you to support both systems. You know, you might be at 10.1 or 10.2 on your enterprise. Say you're using Maximo Spatial 7.1, which supports ArcGIS 9.3. That geodatabase has to be a 9.3.1 geodatabase. So you've got the discrepancy. It allows your enterprise geodatabase to move freely from the Maximo requirements. So this is our edit data source. Something I want to note in here, besides the fact that everything's dropped down, so here's your connection names. You can see the edit and the max. Edit is obviously our enterprise, max is our publish connection. I'm just using one version in that one connection for these two different feature classes. You choose your owner, and then from that owner you get whatever tables are available. That's tables and feature classes. Your unique field, so this is the field that we don't want to use object ID because that can change through edits. So we need a unique ID field, and because we're tying into Maximo Spatial, that's called MX asset number in this scenario. We've got a where clause. So in this example, we've got distribution and transmission poles mixed together in one feature class in edit, but we only want distribution poles brought over to Maximo right now. So we've filtered out which poles that we want to bring into, one, the published geodatabase, and two, the asset classification of ED_pole, which is our distribution poles. So, you know, you can maintain that structure inside of your enterprise geodatabase where they're both in the same feature class, but send them to different places inside of Maximo. Just something I want to note here too is if you're using ArcFM and you've configured this to work inside of ArcFM, which you have to specify a license of ArcFM, you can disable ArcFM auto updaters for individual feature classes. Typically not something you want to do, but you might have a reason to disable those auto updaters while you're updating GIS, and you can check that box on. Related fields, so this is important. So there is a relationship class inside of ArcGIS, our geodatabase, between the poles, which is our support structures actually, and if we go back here, support structure is the actual name of the feature class, and a region, and that's a maintenance region essentially. So there's a polygon that defines the south region, and we want to take something out of that related shape, the shape that's related to this pole, to define where in the hierarchy it exists. So we can see in here that we've got a poles location field, and we can see the other fields in there. There's a transformer location field inside that feature class that then is going to end up mapping to the location where it goes inside of Maximo. Publish is basically just showing me the data source where I'm going to put the features that are filtered out on this edit data source for preparation to be able to be displayed inside of Maximo Spatial. So we don't see the related feature classes and things because this is only a destination for the edit geodatabase data, it makes sure to maintain that that feature class and the features within there. And then we get into the Maximo data source. You can see we can support assets, locations, and service addresses right now. Very common that you might want to support both assets and locations on one data source, and you can do that. So here, again, drop-downs, connection name defined up here. What is the organization identifier? What is my site ID? Those are drop-downs as well. What is my classification once I get in there? So that's my list of classifications that are supported. And I pick my foreign key field to GIS. I'm not going to go through locations and server addresses because we don't have those configured. A couple more minutes, we'll wrap it up here. We've got auto generation of keys turned on, so we can generate keys that it doesn't have to, Sync doesn't have to generate the keys, but we find a lot of times that keys are getting generated by Sync when Sync is in use. The main reason is we can generate those keys in GIS before insertion into Maximo and avoid collisions. So if you've got a different key generation scheme or you're generating your own, you can use that and just turn this off. But it's basically when you add a feature to GIS, by default, it's not going to have a value in that key field. You need to assign it somehow. And once it's been assigned, then we can synchronize, or we can optionally create those assets inside of Maximo. So we've got the checkbox checked. That's how, when we add a new pull, it flowed into Maximo. If you didn't want that to be the case, you uncheck this, and then you would potentially get in that scenario, if our rules were configured as they are now, where you'd see an orphan. You know, we've created something in GIS and it hasn't been added to Maximo, and that's where we'd show it up on the orphan report. The creation rules, very similar to the modified rules. A couple differences. Typically, you'd set up some defaults. So we want to set the status to operating instead of like active or not ready. We want to set the feature class. This is for Maximo Spatial. We also want to map the GIS field values, so I can pick default or GIS field. Then it gives me the whole list in alphabetical order of fields that I can map. And then I choose attribute or specification. From there, it gives me a drop down of all the different fields that are available. And when I get down to my specifications, it's going to give me the list of specifications based on the specification that I defined up in my asset data source, so on and so forth. The modified, so this is how the data flows in when we're creating a new asset in Maximo from a record in GIS. These are the rules for if we find differences between the two systems once that record exists in most systems. So in this case, you'll see a lot of the same. And something to note here is our number of guy wires. If something was deleted, this is how we change the status. So on deletion, do something in Maximo. Feature split, these are points, so we don't have splits, but splits can be automatically detected and resolved. We can talk to anybody about that if they got specific questions, but in the interest of time, I don't want to get into all those split scenarios. And copy and paste, you know, just we're looking at duplication of key values in GIS that happens through the editing process and how to automatically resolve that with Sync. Maximo GIS rules, back to the number of guy wires. So this is where we've got those rules. What is the data coming back to GIS from Maximo for this specific data source or data set?
All right, Jeremy, we have just one more minute.
Sure. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for the configuration. And then we can get into the report. So we get a report generated every time. And it shows you very much the same data that you see in that console as it was running. If there were any errors, they would show up here. Orphans, so this is that case where we see a record identifier in one system, not in the other. So these are in the published geodatabase, but not in edit. And this is an asset in Maximo, but it's not in edit. And that was our poll that got deleted from GIS. Creates, so this just shows me all the key values of what got created, and we don't want to show you all the data. Updates shows you individual fields, attributes that got updated, what the old value was, what the new value is. And then if there were any duplications, which we didn't have in this case. So that is a quick walkthrough, hopefully quick enough, of the sync configuration reporting. Now I'll turn it back over to you, Kathy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have four different questions here. The first one we have here is linking assets or locations through the map possible and or necessary with GeoWorks Sync.
It is possible. I don't want to say it's necessary or unnecessary. It really depends on your workflow. So yes, it is possible to link assets through the map in Maximo Spatial.
Okay, and our next question is what is the advantage of using GeoWorks Sync for the interface over using the MIF?
So the MIF is great. We've used that many times in the past, still use it. One of the key criteria for Sync was to make sure that it's an installed application that can work standalone. We didn't need to install anything in Maximo, install anything in GIS. And we've accomplished that. If we're using the MIF, you have to set up all of your integration objects and interfaces. So not that it's a bad thing, it was just one of our design goals to avoid having to do that. So you can connect right into all the business objects and bypass the MIF, essentially, but still go through all the business logic.
Okay, our next question. How does GeoWorks Sync recover in the event of a power failure?
So in the event that, say, the power would fail and Sync just goes down for the count with the whole system, what happens is everything up to that point has been synchronized, and next time that Sync runs, it's going to see that those are not discrepant between the systems, and it's going to bypass those specific records and continue on. It's very possible that something might have gotten missed on the report that gets output because it might have been in the middle of a record. And when a power failure happens, there's nothing we can do to try to ensure that things get stored. So worst case scenario, power failure, you can just run Sync again and it'll pick up where it left off.
Thank you. Our next question is how long does it take Sync to process 500,000 asset records?
So 500,000 records should take, it varies, very many different criteria, but it should definitely be inside of an hour that it would take for 500,000 records to process and compare everything and process changes. So if every record got changed in that 500,000, it's going to take longer because it's got to actually make updates to the different systems. If what we typically find out is you're in that 1% to 2% change, we're looking at that 1 hour mark for 500,000 records.
Okay, and our last two questions. How is Maximo or GIS updated through web services, API, or direct SQL updates?
So never a direct SQL update, always goes through the application APIs provided by the vendor. So for Maximo, it's Maximo Business Objects. Everything goes through Maximo Business Objects for inserts, updates, and I want to say deletes, but we don't delete anything from Maximo. For the GIS side, it's all Arcobjects, and that's inserts, updates, and can be deletes from the published geodatabase if you configure it that way. So it'll never go straight to SQL because in doing so, you'd be bypassing a lot of business logic at the geodatabase level.
Thank you. And our last question. If the same attribute is updated in Arcgis and Maximo, which one takes precedence?
So if it's mapped bidirectionally, there will be neither one will take precedence. So you don't set one favored over the other. The fact that it's allowed to be updated in both systems, and it's been updated in both systems, which is very uncommon. Usually it's going to get updated in one system and flow the other way. But if it were updated in both systems, then it's going to come out in the error report. So neither one of them takes precedence. If the rules state that GIS always owns this attribute or Maximo always owns this attribute, then the other system's going to get updated.
Okay, thank you. Well, that appears to be the end of our questions. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are also a very proud sponsor of the upcoming MUG Utility Working Group in Knoxville. We invite all of you to stop by and see a live demo of the GeoWorks Sync product. If you do have additional questions today and you'd like to take them offline, please contact us at info-geonexus.com. And again, this session was recorded. You'll be receiving an email briefly with a link to it so that you're able to share it with your colleagues. If there's no other questions, we wish you a wonderful day and thank you again for joining us.